Hello everyone, today we're going to go over what an upstander is and how to be an upstander instead of a bystander. So to illustrate this topic, let's first talk about the case of Kitty Genovese. Some of you may have heard about Kitty Genovese, but those who haven't, in the early 1960s, Kitty was attacked in Queens, New York in her apartment building courtyard. She was stabbed multiple times, she screamed out for help, and her attacker fled the scene. He then came back, stabbed her again, raped her, robbed her, and ultimately killed her. While this was happening, there were reports that people had heard her screaming, but nobody called 911 or tried to intervene, and she was discovered the next morning by a neighbor and died in the ambulance. This tragic story illustrates the phenomenon known as diffusion of responsibility, which essentially means that people are less likely to intervene or take responsibility for something when there are other people around. The idea is that people think, oh well, there's all these other people around. Someone must have called 911 or is planning to intervene, so I don't need to do anything. This phenomenon is the reason that Kitty ultimately died, because no one took responsibility and made sure she was given medical care. This highlights the importance of being an upstander rather than a bystander. A bystander simply watches as someone is being harassed or discriminated against, while an upstander intervenes. This course is meant to teach you the tools to be an upstander. I want to embolden you to use the resources and privileges that you have to advocate for those who don't have those privileges. Particularly in this course, I'm wanting you to advocate for the LGBTQIA+ community, who are not afforded the same privileges as straight, cisgender people. In order to have a greater grasp on the identities that fall under the LGBTQIA umbrella, let's look at the differences between gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, and attraction. Now this diagram is called the gender unicorn. I really love this because it allows you to view various aspects of identity on a sliding scale, rather than it being presented as you're either one thing or the other thing. It's also called binary thinking. So the first section is gender identity, which is one's internal concept of their gender. It's an innate feeling that one has. So people can identify as female, male, a combination of female and male, or no gender at all. So for me, for example, I identify as non-binary, meaning I don't identify as female or male. If I were to fill this out and I encourage you all to do this for yourselves, I'll leave a link to the interactive version of the gender unicorn, but for me, I would most likely slide the scales for female, male, and other genders to the center, because for me, I identify with multiple genders. The next section is gender expression. Now, the difference between gender identity and gender expression is identity deals with your thoughts and your feelings about your gender, while gender expression is the external appearance of your gender. So this could be your mannerisms, how you dress, the tone of your voice, the way you present your body. And those forms of expression may not align with what society deems as feminine or masculine. So for example, I was assigned female at birth, I have breast tissue, and that causes me a lot of dysphoria, which is a term used to convey the distressing feeling of your body appearance not aligning with your gender identity. So one of the ways I convey my gender identity through my gender expression is by wearing a binder. So a binder is essentially a compressive chest covering that flattens my breast tissue to make my chest appear flat, or mostly flattened. It never gets fully flat, but what that does for me is it allows me to go out in public and I feel like I'm presenting my gender in the most authentic way I can. It's important to note that gender identity and gender expression do not need to align. So for example, you can identify as female, but your gender expression can be further on the masculine side. Or maybe your gender expression changes from day to day. Like one day you might want to present more masculine, and the other day you want to present more feminine. That's the beauty of looking at gender on a spectrum or a sliding scale, is that you don't need to put yourself in one box and stay in that box forever. The next section is sex assigned at birth. Now you may have heard this term be called biological sex, but we really want to avoid using that term, often because the way that sex is determined for a baby is through their genitalia, and then a doctor or midwife will then assign, the sex that aligns with their genitalia. But genitalia doesn't tell the full story of someone's biology, like what chromosomes they have. So for example, someone could have XY chromosomes, which is generally seen in males, but they have female genitalia. Additionally, someone could be intersex, which means they are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the categories of female or male. Sometimes either a doctor or the child's parents will assign their sex as either male or female, and then also sometimes they will elect for their child to have surgery in order for their sexual or reproductive anatomy to align with the binary definition of male or female. This is important to highlight because often people who want to discredit trans or non-binary identities will say, well, sex is binary and that's natural, it's biology. So, it's not made up like your identity. But that's, one, offensive, and also not true. As I highlighted in the example of intersex folks and folks born with chromosomes that don't align with the typical sex they're assigned at birth, sex is non-binary. It's not. So someone whose gender identity and gender identity that aligns with their sex assigned at birth is considered cisgender. Now, someone whose gender identity or gender expression that doesn't align with their sex at birth is considered transgender. Transgender, or as you'll probably hear me say often, trans, is an umbrella term that can encompass non-binary or gender non-conforming identities. Those are identities where someone's gender doesn't align with the binary categories of female or male. However, not all non-binary or gender non-conforming individuals identify as trans. The last sections deal with physical and emotional attraction. I want to make it clear that who you are attracted to does not determine your gender. Those are two separate things. However, these sections highlight that you can be attracted to men, women, or other genders. Moreover, you may be physically attracted to certain genders, but not emotionally attracted to them. Meaning, you may think women are beautiful, and you're attracted to them, but they don't make you feel that warm feeling inside, and you don't really want to date them or have a partnership with them. Again, this is all on a spectrum, and some people may not feel any sort of physical or emotional attraction to anyone. That person may identify as asexual. So as we learn in this class, there's many different orientations people can identify with. Now, folks in the LGBTQIA+ community face discrimination and harassment frequently, which is why we need upstanders to call out that harassment and provide appropriate support. You can decide when to be an upstander, but there are certain situations where it's deeply needed. So when is it necessary to be an upstander? When someone is at risk of physical violence because of their gender identity, it's absolutely necessary to intervene, make sure that person's safe. Someone may be at risk of being harmed or is being harmed. Say they are being told they can't use a certain restroom, or someone is threatening to out them, which could put them in a situation that's really dangerous. It's definitely important to intervene then as well. You should also get involved if you witness any kind of verbal altercation, like if someone's calling someone else a slur or being verbally abusive. I'll give you an example. My fiance and I were holding hands and walking in downtown Riverside, and we happened to walk past this guy who had a microphone, and he was talking about his Christianity and how people needed to repent, which is fine. He had every right to do that. But when we walked by him and he saw that we were holding hands, he kind of narrowed in on us and told us directly that we were going to hell and us of all people needed to repent. And this put us in a very uncomfortable and potentially unsafe situation. And we definitely were, able to defend ourselves, but nobody around even tried to help or call out that guy or see if we were okay, which would have made us feel a little bit safer and a lot less on edge. And honestly, every time I walk past that part of Riverside, I still feel that kind of like on edge feeling, like, is this going to happen again? So yeah, someone who would have intervened would have made that situation a lot better. The last instance where intervention is necessary is if you hear someone say anything inappropriate, offensive, or abusive. Now, how should you intervene? Here's the 5 Ds of intervention. You could be direct and call the person out who's causing harm. You could also diffuse the situation by checking in on the person or who's being harmed, or maybe try to make a joke or something that makes the situation less dangerous. You could also delegate by calling a security guard or the police. I do want to make a caveat here that many LGBTQIA+ people have had very negative interactions with the police due to implicit bias and internalized homophobia and stuff like that. So this solution may actually make things feel less safe or even put people into potentially dangerous situations. So I would be cautious of this if you are thinking of calling the police. You can also distract and redirect attention from the one who's being harmed. And lastly, you could delay intervention. Maybe you heard your coworker say something derogatory about gay people, and in the moment you didn't really know exactly how to intervene, but then the next day you come to your coworker with the words you've planned and explain, what they said is not okay. I kind of like this option to delay because for me, sometimes when I'm in a stressful situation, I'll freeze and not be able to say what I think. But then once I'm out of that situation, I can kind of formulate my thoughts, and then when I see that person again, I can explain why their words or actions were harmful. So when you're determining your course of action, it's important to assess the situation. Look at who's being harmed, who's the aggressor, is the person being harmed in imminent danger? You also need to assess the safety of the situation. Could you be harmed, or could the person being harmed be put into more danger if you intervene? Then you want to figure out which of the 5 Ds is most appropriate for the situation and is something you're capable of doing. If necessary, get the right people involved to intervene. If something happens at your job, let HR know. If a classmate is causing harm, let your instructor know, or maybe even file a report through Title IX. So throughout this course, I want you to think about how you can be an upstander and how you can use your unique abilities to advocate for others. I've also included a video below which goes into detail about how to be an ally for the LGBTQIA+ community. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the ways you can be an upstander in your community.